All right, welcome everyone. It is noon on the dot, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining Restoring Nature with Prescribed Fire, Why We Burn and How We Do It Safely, with our speaker, Dave Borneman. This webinar is presented by the Washtenaw County Conservation District, and it is the first presentation in our Native Plant Expo and Marketplace speaker series. I'm Summer Roberts. I'm the WCCD Community Forester and your host for today. So if you're unfamiliar with us, the Washtenaw County Conservation District is a local unit of state government run by a 5-member board of publicly elected directors. Since our founding in 1948, our mission has been to assist residents with the conservation, management, and wise use of natural resources in Washtenaw County. In 2020, a countywide millage was passed, so thank you to all of you who live in Washtenaw, to expand our capacity and services, which include the Michigan Agricultural Environmental Assurance Program, also known as MEAP, conservation assistance for local, state, and federal cost share opportunities, educational conservation workshops, webinars like this one, and in-person seminars, annual resource distributions of trees and shrubs, which are quite popular, native plants, maybe you've been to some of these, and rain barrels, and a tool lending library and rental program, and a lot more that you can find on our website, which is washtenaw.cd.org, and we are also adding that to the chat. And this is a nice photo of most of our staff and one of our board members holding some trees at one of our tree and shrub distributions. So as I mentioned, this webinar is part of our speaker series for the Native Plant Expo and Marketplace event, which brings together native plant nurseries, landscaping companies, conservation organizations, and more in one convenient location for Washtenaw County residents. So please save the date for this year's event. It will be held on Saturday, June 3rd from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Washtenaw Farm Council grounds. And native plants will be available to purchase in person from numerous nurseries at the expo event. But you can also pre-order over 50 native potted plant species that you can pick up at the Native Plant Expo and Marketplace. And you can order about 50 varieties of trees and shrubs from our spring tree and shrub sale on our online store right now. And that URL is store.washtenaw.cd.org. And that will also be going in the chat. So I also wanted to mention that we are currently accepting vendor and sponsor applications for the Native Plant Expo and Marketplace. And we'll share that application link in the chat as well. And we'd like to take this time to thank and acknowledge our initial sponsors that have already signed up. So thank you to Monarch Watch, to Restoring Nature with Fire, David Borneman's company, Pollinator Partnership, and Adapt Community Supported Ecology, Feral Flora, and the Legacy Land Conservancy. I also would like to plug the next 2 presentations in the series. So the next webinar is supporting native pollinators in backyards to barnyards with Connie Crancer from the Pollinator Partnership on February 23rd, again from 12 to 1:30 p.m. on Zoom. So hopefully you can join us for that. And the third and final presentation in the speaker series is called A Year in Blooms Through a Pollinator's Eyes with Vince DeMarie of Windy Rock Farm and Nursery. And this is actually going to be an in-person seminar at Dexter Township Hall on March 16th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. So you can sign up for both of those events on our website. Again, you're going to hear it a lot, washtenaw.cd.org/events. And we'll also add that to the chat as well. So next, I'd like to introduce the WCCD's resource coordinator, Doug Reith.
Hi, everyone. I'm Doug Reith, and as Summer mentioned, I'm the resource coordinator on staff. And I also manage the Native Plant Expo and Marketplace and the annual plant sales, rain barrel sales, and our equipment rental program. But today I have the honor of tracking your questions for our presenter. So some quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees are on mute and not visible during the presentation. So in order to ask a question, please use the Q&A panel. If anyone wants to test that out now, you can open the Q&A panel, ask a question. We can respond in that, or I'll present that to Dave. So Dave is open to answering some questions during the presentation. So I'll do my best to pick a few to share to Dave while he's on the topics. And then we'll have some time at the end to answer questions. And a quick reminder is that we'll be recording this webinar, and it'll be shared on our YouTube channel, where you can also watch last year's speaker series and other videos from the Conservation District. So we'll share that link now too. Thanks, Summer.
Great, thank you, Doug. All right, so next, before I introduce our speaker, we wanted to do a quick poll to better understand our attendees. So Doug, if you go ahead and launch that first poll for us. Our first question is, where do you live? And you should see that poll popping up on your screens. I'll give you another few seconds to answer it. Looks like Washtenaw County is in the lead, but just barely. All right, Doug, if you want to go ahead and share those results with everyone. Awesome. So it looks like we have mostly audience in Washtenaw County, but some people outside of Washtenaw County, but in Michigan. So great. Thank you. Excited to have you guys here. Our next question is, let's see, are you hoping to use prescribed fire on a site that you manage? And if you are, please let us know what type of site in the chat. We'd love to hear if it's a oak hickory forest, or if it's a native prairie, or where you're hoping to use it. I'll give you just a few more seconds. All right, Doug, do you want to close out that and share the results? It looks like the majority are new to the practice, but would like to learn more. And there's also a good chunk, a quarter, who are kind of unsure, but here to learn. And little under a quarter that have already been using prescribed fires. Great. Awesome. Well, the next and final poll question. Let's see. Why are you interested in prescribed fire as a management tool? And you can actually, this poll, you can scroll down. It's kind of a long one. It has, I think, more answers than can fit on that little screen. So there might be, and I think you can pick multiple. So go ahead and try it out. And if you have other reasons, feel free to add those to the chat as well. And Doug, if you're seeing anything interesting coming in the chat that you want to share, feel free to jump on. Give you just a few more seconds to finish that poll. All right, Doug, if you want to close that out for us. Cool. All right. So it looks like a lot of people are interested in controlling invasive species, assisting with the life cycle of some native plants, creating critical habitat for wildlife, reducing ticks, yep, and removing thatch from a site in preparation for planting, and preventing wildfires. Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone for taking those polls. It can be a little bit lonely doing these webinars as a speaker or a host, just because there's not as much interaction. So it's great to get to know you all and to understand kind of what you're here to learn about and what you hope to use it for. So without further ado, now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dave Borneman, who'll be presenting Restoring Nature with Prescribed Fire: Why We Burn and How We Do It Safely. For thousands of years, intentional burning of the landscape has been a part of what is now southern Michigan. Dave is going to discuss the history of fire in our area and why burning can be a valuable tool for those interested in restoring native Michigan landscapes. Dave recently retired after 28 years as a natural area preservation manager for the city of Ann Arbor Parks. And now he can devote more time to his private business, Restoring Nature with Fire, David Borneman LLC, and conducting prescribed burns and doing ecological consulting with a wide range of clients across the Midwest. When he's not burning, Dave is likely either tending to the family cabin in Northeast Michigan or traveling with his wife. So thank you so much, Dave, for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
Hello. Let's see. All right. I think I'm here. Thank you,
Yep.
Summer. Thank you, Doug. I would say it's great to be here, but here is where I spend every day in my house. And all of you are out there. What a strange way it is to give a talk. If we were in person, I would look out of the audience and greet you all and say it's great to be here with you and encourage you. I want to have a conversation with you. I want this to be as helpful for you as possible. So feel free to ask questions. I talk to lots of groups about fire, and I always encourage people to interrupt me, ask questions. I want to make sure that this is a meaningful presentation to you. Summer's right that it can be lonely. I can't see any of you. I recognize some of the names. I look through the list of participants and I see a bunch of people that I know there, some former staff, some of my clients, and others that I know. So do feel free to type in questions. I've told Doug, make sure you interrupt me and ask if you have questions along the way, but I'll leave time at the end for some longer Q&A then as well. I'll also say it's hard, especially not seeing you guys and being able to read your faces, put together a talk like this for such a diverse audience. Sometimes I've given talks to potential volunteers or to fire departments or other targeted groups. You guys are a wide range of people. So it's hard to know exactly what you're looking for and what's going to be most useful to you. There's lots of different reasons as people burn, as you've already demonstrated. So I want to, some of the things that are in here may not pertain to you. Maybe you live in town and some of the stuff in the country doesn't apply, or you're a business owner. Hopefully there'll be something in here that'll be useful for you regardless of who you are. So we'll see if all the technology works here, and I'm going to share my screen. I can make this work. There we go. All right. Let's see. So yeah, most of this was already shared. I'm an Illinois farm boy, degrees in environmental education and conservation biology. So I like talking to people about nature. And now I've been working, besides my work with the city, I've been doing my own work as a contractor and consultant for the last 22 years. I apologize in advance if my cat starts meowing, she's usually pretty quiet this time of day, but she started meowing a little. So besides that, I guess I've got a lot of other credentials, I think, towards prescribed fire. Been involved with Michigan's Prescribed Fire Council on their steering committee since we started 24 years ago, and twice as a past chair. Certified as a prescribed burn leader in Ohio and Illinois. There's no certification program currently in place in Michigan. That's a complicated story. I could talk more about later if people wonder about that. But most of my experience just comes from on the ground. I've done some burn training and had a chance to burn in a wide range of environments. I went out to California early on and did a couple weeks of training out there, very different landscapes than what we have around here. And the training is useful, but really it's all those years of being part of fire that has, I think, been the most valuable to me. I'm going to talk about prescribed fire, especially in Southeast Michigan, but let me just first mention and talk about the fact that Michigan has lots of different ecosystems that are fire impacted or fire dependent or fire adapted all across the state. We know about prairies and oak savannas that are obvious, and then the map here that you'll see on several slides from the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, showing some of the pre-European settlement vegetation. All the pink in these is oak hickory forest, and the yellow is prairie. Oak woods that show up, this is a map from the DNR. They've highlighted a couple of the larger oak woods there, I guess. But also wetlands, sedge meadows, prairie fens are pretty common areas to be burning here in Southeast Michigan, and those are home to Mitchell's cedar butterfly and some other equally rare plants and animals. So this is that map from the Michigan Natural Features Inventory. Maybe you've seen it. There's a swath coming up from the Southwest Michigan, that yellow and pink peninsula that sticks up, that comes right through Washtenaw County. And it's interesting to see that our participants are only barely over half of us from Washtenaw County. If you're in one of the surrounding counties, you'll see a lot of even more savanna and grassland in Jackson and further west and up in Oakland County. Some of these areas, very much of southern Michigan saw fire in the past. It was a part of its ecosystem. If we zoom in here a little bit closer on that map to Washtenaw County, you can get a little bit better look of the oak and hickory there. And again, all the yellow up in Oakland County and Jackson County and Ingham County, some of those. So one of the reasons to burn is that at least a third of Michigan's native plant species occur within Michigan's fire adapted ecosystems. That's about 605 of our 1,800 or so native plant species. And of those 605, 121 of those are species that are threatened or endangered or at risk of becoming extinct. So fire adapted, fire dependent ecosystems are throughout Michigan. They host a lot of rare plants, and that's one of the reasons to manage them. My talk today is going to be the first half talking about why we burn, building a case for prescribed fire, and then we'll end up talking in greater detail about how we actually do that fire. A couple different ways to present some of this same information. Here's a different map from the Michigan State University Extension. The green areas are all barrens, prairies, and savannas. Looking historically from around 1800 on the left, and then on the right, what we see today, only a few little green specks around there. Pretty good concentration of the remaining ones in Washtenaw County and a few other spots around the state. So another way to describe what these landscapes are like, especially oak savannas and oak woodlands here in the Washtenaw County area, come from some historic quotes that I like to share. Here's one from a guy named Carl Neidhard, writing from Ann Arbor to Pleasant Lake back in August of 1834. Carl says, "For the first few miles we passed through the woods. Soon we reached the so-called oak openings, where the trees stand a few paces apart and where the ground is overgrown with luxurious grass. Passage is obstructed neither by bushes nor by fallen trees." I like that, so I put it in italics. We'll come back to that. "Small knolls alternate with lovely little valleys. No park laid out by human hands could compare with this natural setting." 1834. I got a couple other ones here. J.W. Wing near Scioto Township near Dexter in 1834 says, at this season of the year, the country was beautiful beyond description. The plains were covered at intervals as far as the eye could reach with wide-spreading forest trees, which gave it the appearance of an immense park, and the earth was covered with a rich carpet of beautifully variegated wildflowers and grapes. And my screen has blocked off the bottom. The bottom line. I've got a black bar across there. So how does that go? Which gave it the appearance of an immense park or something. I guess you can read that. I can't read that last line to you. But this line about widespreading forest trees, I just pulled a couple of examples from the city of Ann Arbor and from Pittsfield Township. There are probably some others, but it's pretty common to have a big open grown oak tree like this as a logo for some of our local municipalities, local communities. That was a pretty common sight here. Not our tall, skinny, straight trees that you would see in today's forest, but these wide spreading ones. A tree like the one shown here did not grow up in the forest, what we would call a forest. It grew up where there was lots of light, so it didn't have to grow very tall. It could spread out its branches, and those would have been the landscape, the trees that were here historically. A few other quotes. Here's one from John Gordon in October 1836, 6 miles west of Plymouth. We left the heavy timber and passed into a sandy soil with light oak woods. That means it was not heavily forested, what we might call a savanna or an oak barrens. Trees grow at intervals of 30 feet and have a young undergrowth just springing up, which is burnt down every year. Think about that. Trees 30 feet apart. Go into your forest today, and you'll probably see trees much more tightly packed than that. That's not what this was historically. It may have been, it certainly was common in some parts of the country, but here just 200 years ago, the trees were not that tightly packed in. They were more spread out and a lot of light getting in between there. It would have been pretty common to see those wide spreading trees. The one shown in this picture, you see a fire scar at the bottom, showing us that fire was a regular part of the landscape. The trees survived that fine, but with hot fires, they would occasionally get scarred as well. So a fire scar like this would have been fairly common. John Gordon also says oaks of the circumference of 9 to 15 feet abound in the forests in the country between Dixboro and Ann Arbor. 9 to 15 feet circumference. So this is a diameter. I've got my arm stretched out here. Diameter about 3 to 5 feet is how big those trees were. A little rolling for the first few miles, and then the oak openings begin. We might call them oak savannas. They call them oak openings. White oak and bur oak at intervals of 30 to 40 feet with an undergrowth 5 to 6 feet high, which has the appearance of being annually burnt down, as I am informed it is. So again and again, we hear about this. Widespread trees, 3 to 5 feet, 30 to 40 feet apart, with lots of undergrowth underneath there. One more here, 1829. Somebody from Canada writing in the Ann Arbor area says the singular and interesting appearance of the country in its alternating groves and fields and timberlands is a subject of inquiry with the speculative mind. To me, it has the appearance of a highly improved district. So far as my observations and inquiries have extended, they support the hypothesis that the fire annually communicated by the Indians for the purpose of hunting has produced the present prairies, plains, and openings that diversify the whole face of the country. Fire annually communicated by the Indians. So here we have just 200 years ago, less than that, there was still fire being annually communicated to the landscape. Why were Native Americans using fire? I won't pause to quiz you all just because that's so awkward to do here. But ponder this for a minute. It said they're hunting. Some of the ones we've read about in the literature. One is warfare. We hear about Native Americans using fire as a weapon against their enemies. If you didn't want that to happen, you might choose to remove the fuel on your own terms, so someone didn't come in there at night and light your village on fire to reduce fuel for safety. Clearing the land. If you don't clear land around here, then our forest, our oak savannas and our oak barrens turn into denser forests. So they burn to keep the land open. Now, some people would say, well, so that doesn't seem very natural if humans are doing it. We're talking about human human-started fires here. Historically, Native Americans burned the landscape in this part of the world, and actually all around the world. There's an anthropologist named Stephen Pyne, Pyne, and he would say, what is it that makes us unique as a species? You know, the beavers build dams, giraffes have the long neck, the elephants have the tusks. What about us? We're the fire species. We're the species that uses fire. We might use it for cooking or heating, or all these other uses. But in the fossil record and in the pollen record, they find where humans come in, we see charcoal and we see fire. So humans have been bringing fire to this landscape. And whether or not that's natural might depend on your view of where humans fit into nature. Are humans part of the Garden of Eden and an active participant in it, or are we on the outside looking in? I'll let you answer that for yourself. Maybe rather than calling it natural fire, if you have an issue with that, we should talk about historic fire. But historically, Native Americans were burning this landscape. One of the reasons they did was for selecting for desired species and creating habitat for game. Desired species, you know, if you were building or making rope or needed fibers for baskets and other whatever else they use fibers for, you maybe didn't like the old coarse thick vegetation, canes, stalks, so they would reburn those areas to get the fresh growth that would be more pliable and have other better uses for their fiber making. Hunting, this is not a great picture for hunting, but you know, before the days of high-powered rifles with scopes and things, if you had a herd of grazing animals, you might build a fire in a U shape around that herd to drive them in a set direction, so you could put your best spear throws there with hopes of bringing down some animals for dinner. And pest management, we mentioned ticks already. We'll mention it again here shortly, but if you lived in this landscape and you needed to didn't have a way to escape from the critters that were out there, the little insects and things, the ticks, pest management was best done by fire, one of the ways to do that. There's been some recent research talking about some papers out about looking at the effects of prescribed fire on tick abundance. This graph looks a little bit confusing, but basically the dark lines, the B is burned, the UB is unburned. So you can see that the black square were the areas where they were unburned both years, and the tick populations were very high there, whereas any of the others where there was at least one burn of the 2 years had much lower, almost non-existent tick populations. I've gotten more and more requests from people who want burning done because they're tired of having so many ticks in their yard or woods on them and their pets. And cultural reasons. This is not a group of Native Americans, but we as humans have this deep connection with fire, whether it's a prescribed fire or sitting around the campfire, candlelight dinner. We like fire. We have a connection with fire, and it's pretty fascinating to watch. And I feel lucky to be able to work with fire so much. It really is an amazing element that at times I do just sit and stare at it and enjoy what I'm seeing. So why do we use fire? Well, some of the same reasons. I get lots of requests from people that want to improve wildlife habitat. If you're a hunter, deer and turkey and other game species are often, we use fire to manage habitat for them and also to attract them. I heard recently about a practice I was not aware of around here, but maybe it happens, but down south, hunters will go out maybe 6 weeks before hunting season and burn about a 1 acre area around their deer stand or their turkey blind. And then 6 weeks later, as the regrowth comes back, they'll attract the game animals that use that fresh growth, which I thought was interesting. So both to improve wildlife habitat for game species and then to attract the game to their hunting sites. Here's another graph talking about the tick issues, just demonstrating the huge increase in Lyme disease in Michigan, well, in recent years. And that's a greater and greater concern for those of us that spend time outside. This was mentioned as one of the options in your poll, removing thatch prior to planting. As people catch on to doing more and more native landscaping, like perhaps many of you, if you're trying to convert your lawn to a prairie, you probably need to burn off the thatch that's there. In this case, this was herbicided first, and now we can't get good seed contact there, so we burn it off, and then we can get a good seed contact with nice bare soil after that. I mainly leave this in so I can show pictures of my now 26-year-old daughter from years ago. We also want to remove that thatch prior to herbiciding. In this case, we've got a field of a wetland full of Phragmites, and that's one of the ways to control that is with herbicide, but when it's so dense and thick there, you can't really get a good herbicide application. So we burn that off so that it's easier to get in there and do some herbiciding after that thatch is gone. This thatch is kind of a big deal. Why do we keep talking about what's the benefit of thatch? Besides getting rid of it, you also then, just by removing that insulating layer, you blacken the soil from the fire. The burn itself doesn't so much heat up the soil, but it blackens that soil and allows it to heat up by the sun. That may not seem like a big deal, but it was made pretty clear to me a few years ago when I was doing a prairie burn, middle of April, hot burn, big flames, fire goes across the prairie. There's lots of thatch there, and as the prairie fire burned through, there was ice left on the ground underneath, which I thought was interesting. It shows that both the fire does not penetrate the soil, does not even get hot enough to melt the ice, but it and also that thatch from the prairie insulates it and kept the soil from ever heating up. Remove that insulating layer, and that black soil can heat up in the sun. That warmer soil really benefits a lot of our native plants, especially our warm season native grasses. This is just a shot of what it would look like with that insulating blanket there. And then fire is used a lot to discourage woody vegetation, especially seedlings and saplings. The younger trees and many exotics are just not adapted to fire, and fire is a great way to clean them out. Our native oak forests, our oak trees and things have evolved with fire. They've got many characteristics, thick corky bark and things, and they're active resprouters. So they not only can handle fire, they are dependent on fire. Our oak forests, an acorn, in order to germinate, needs two things: contact with bare soil and sunlight. So in our dense shady forests, we get no oak regeneration, no acorns germinating. Burn off that thatch, let in more light, and we get lots of young acorns germinating. So our native oak species benefit from fire, but fire discourages a lot of the other competitors. The alternative, and a lot of these pictures are from the city parks in Ann Arbor, where I spent 28 years. Hopefully your woods doesn't look like this, but many of our city parks around southern Michigan do look like this. You've got a thick layer of green shrubs. Remember that comment from the historic quote, "Passage obstructed neither by bushes nor fallen trees." Too many of our woods and forests, former savannas, passage is obstructed by bushes and fallen trees. You can't walk through there, let alone expect an acorn to germinate or a young oak seedling to grow under there. But if you remove that shade producing layer, like is on the right side of the picture here, just that extra light alone is enough to bring back lots of flowers. If there's a good seed bank there, you can often restore a lot of what was there before simply by getting rid of the shrubs and letting in more light. I have some before and after pictures from many of these are from Furstenberg Park near Gallup Park in Ann Arbor, right along the Huron River. This was taken, you'll see the trees that are hidden there. I apologize. I put this together. I did not anticipate having this black bar across the bottom, so I can't read the dates down there, but I'm assuming that you can read them. I don't remember them all well enough, but over the course of, I think, about 13 years here, through burning and some shrub removal, we went from that to this. Remember those historic quotes. That's why I stress those. Many of us, if you just looked around in your neighborhood to see, well, what is nature like, you get a very warped view of it. And I think those quotes from just 200 years ago paint a very different picture for us. Passage obstructed neither by bushes or fallen trees, widespread trees 30 to 40 feet apart, lots of wildflowers underneath. You can start to get that more here. This picture here is not what our communities look like for the last 5,000 years. This is much closer to it. So how do you get rid of those shrubs? Well, one way is to cut them down with a brush blade like this, and then follow up behind with herbicide wand and a sponge applicator and dab each stem. Very time consuming, very expensive. You're using herbicides. A much more historically accurate way to do this, I won't say natural, but historically accurate way to clear them is with fire. This doesn't need to be a raging inferno like you might see out west in some of the wildfires. Just a slow back burn like this. I've seen a fire like this top kill buckthorn 3 inches in diameter. Top kill meaning it may resprout, but you've taken away that shade layer that was the big issue and let more sunlight in. I say backfire, we'll talk about different kinds of burns, but see how the smoke's going off to the left. That tells us in this picture, the wind is from the right to the left. So the fire is backing into the wind there. Some more before and after photos, a series of these in Furstenberg Park. Years ago, when I first started with the city, we did a little demonstration here. We raked a line through the shrubs here. We burned just the left side and then did not burn the right side of it. 19 days later, couldn't tell much difference except the burn of some of the leaf litter. But once things started to leaf out 5 weeks later, saw a pretty dramatic change. We had top killed all those shrubs on the left. 3.5 years later, you could still see an impact from that. We kept this site like this as a demonstration for years, and then finally we cleared it out, and now it looks closer to this, which is so much closer to what it was historically. A lot of sunlight getting in. You can actually see the Huron River in the distance there, which you could not before. Another reason that we burn is because fire really stimulates native wildflowers. I can't tell you, I'm not enough of a plant physiologist to explain in great detail, but I can just tell you that it works. Whether it's putting nutrients back in the soil, removing the competition, letting in more sunlight, or what it is. But I like to tell the story years ago of making a believer out of our staff botanist. She was a big proponent of prairie burns, wasn't as comfortable or wasn't as familiar with woodland burns at the time, but we did a burn in what's now Mary Beth Doyle Park in southeast Ann Arbor, which was kind of a medium level woods at the time. She thought not a lot of wildflowers there, but a few. We did a burn in early March there, and 3 weeks later she called me up on her cell phone and said, "Oh my gosh, Dave, you can't believe the trout lilies out here. There are so many trout lilies. It's a solid carpet of trout lilies. There were some there before, but nothing like what we saw here." And then 3 weeks later, I got another call. "Oh my gosh, Dave, you can't believe the trillium out here. It is amazing. I've never seen so many trillium in this park." And then a couple of weeks later, "Oh my gosh, you can't believe the wild geranium that was out here." And then it was a false Solomon seal. Wave after wave of the native wildflowers came back. And if we had any questions about the benefits of fire, just seeing what nature was telling us really made believers out of people. We burn because fire is a great way to control many different invasives, not all of them. There's a buckthorn on the left that's a 3-inch one, top killed by a fire. It's resprouting here, but we've let in all that additional light. I put in this bad picture of garlic mustard here just to say that we've tried to control garlic mustard with fire in the past, and that's one of the ones that is not really well controlled. At least once you reach those second-year rosettes, it doesn't work well. You can go in and burn the new seedlings the first year when they're just very tiny and burn them off that way. The problem is you have to do that late enough in the year so that they've all germinated. By that point in time, you might also have a lot of native wildflowers that are coming in. So not quite as good of a tool there. And you need to do that for multiple years in order to try to control it. Probably better to go in and hand pull some of those, but fire can have some impact on the first year seedlings. We talked about prairies and woodlands. I also want to make sure we know that fire was historically a part of burning in wetlands too, especially some of our sedge meadows and fens around here. This was a study that one of our staff, also a PhD candidate at the time, Dave Warners, who now teaches over at Calvin College in the biology department. He did his PhD research on the effects of prescribed fire in sedge meadows. And so we took one of our parks and put up a bunch of plots that he collected data in, raked off break there, burned on the left side. This was in May, middle of May of '94, one of my first burns with the city. I was a little worried about burning that late in the season. A lot of things were up and green. We wilted a lot of plants. I thought, oh boy, I hope this turns out okay. Luckily, 2 weeks later, things greened up and I was able to, they responded pretty well. 9 weeks later, it looked, the two sides looked identical, but they weren't identical, because when he collected data, he saw that that fall we had after the burns, the area that had been burned had twice as much biomass, twice as much standing growth there. And that's one of the ways to explain. People sometimes see the smoke and say, well, you're putting all this carbon in the air. That's bad for the environment. But prescribed fires actually increase the amount of biomass that a healthy prairie or wetland has there. And that additional biomass helps it sequester more carbon in the soil. You're just releasing the carbon at once that would otherwise be slowly released through decomposition and things, but they come back stronger and healthier with more biomass. And it's not just more plant matter, it's a greater diversity, greater species richness was also demonstrated in this sedge meadow from his studies there. A couple more photos that I think are fun to show from Cedar Bend, one of the oldest parks in Ann Arbor. There's a hillside in there that 100 years ago was covered with bloodroot. That quote about a rich carpet of beautiful, very beautifully variegated wildflowers and grapes, one of those historic quotes, reminds me of this landscape. Lots of open hillside there. There's a hairpin turn in Cedar Bend Park. This is just down below North Campus. If you know the Ann Arbor area, that hairpin turn is really easy to find. It's a pretty distinct area to go back and take a follow-up photo. Look at the dappled light. There's still a lot of sunlight here. We don't have the trees that are 30 or 40 feet apart, but there's still a lot of sunlight coming in. Jump to 1997. And this is what too many of our parks, especially our urban parks, look like. The woods are choked out with exotic buckthorn, honeysuckle, autumn olive and things. And that is not at all what it used to look like. Passage is obstructed by bushes here. So with some work, we were able to cut those out, burn them out. Burning was an important part of this. And I think this is both much more historically accurate and a much lovelier, more attractive landscape to try to wander in. We hear concerns about kids these days spending too much time inside. They should get outside more, go play in the woods. If I were a kid, I would not want to play in the woods like this. This is not a safe area. You can't see into there. We as large primates evolving on the savannas of Africa, we are hardwired to like that park-like setting that we've recreated with our urban gardens and parks and things. We like to be able to see across the landscape. We don't feel comfortable in an area like this. That's a much more pleasing environment. When we did that in Cedar Bend, we had great response from this plant, which was previously unknown from our plant surveys, called upland boneset. It's a state threatened plant, was last inventoried in the county 60 years prior to our first burn there. This description is probably the same population in Cedar Bend Park. We had not recorded it there in our plant surveys, and it showed up only after we did these burns. So I think that if we restore these plant communities through fire, we bring back insects like this one that's on a population of upland boneset, pollinating that. Because even though we talk a lot about the plants and the fire really most visibly perhaps benefits the plants, it's not just the plant communities that we care about. We also care about wildlife. We don't want to, the fires are supposed to benefit the native biodiversity. This toad, for example, is hopping around in there, not harmed by the fire, hopping around quite safely. Probably the biggest danger for mice and things that are moving around there is not the fire itself, but the fact that we've removed the thatch. We'll often see hawks hovering overhead hunting for mice and things that no longer have a place to hide. The reason that toad wasn't damaged is that you can still see there's still some thatch on the ground. These fires typically, unlike the wildfires out west that might burn so hot and sterilize the soil, these fires burn most of the above ground thatch, but it often leaves a layer on the bottom. The heat doesn't penetrate the ground at all. There's been experiments where thermometers are put in at various depths, And below about a half an inch, there's not even a detection of any change in temperature with a fire going through. So if you're an animal that can burrow down in the ground or in the thatch a little bit, you should be fine from the burn. I won't say that we never kill anything in here. Occasionally we'll catch a snake. If we have a fast moving prairie fire, we might kill some snakes that way. So if we have populations that we know a site is population for Massasauga rattlesnakes or some other rare herps, or just concerned about herps in general, reptiles and amphibians, we can back burn through those sites if that's what is required. And that slower moving fire makes it easier for those things to escape. We also know that we do lots of burning to try to improve habitat for pollinators, butterflies, and things. Many of these are sun-loving species that really benefit from the fire. Just to summarize some of this, here's a report done by the Michigan Natural Features Inventory a few years ago, looking at prairies and savannas in Michigan, restoration and management. And we've heard some of these statistics before. Only 1% of prairies remain. We know that prairies are in trouble, but oak savannas are even less common. 0.02% of savannas remain. And that map there on the right, you can see that same peninsula of prairie and savanna that extends up into southeast Michigan, lower Michigan. These are highly diverse ecosystems with many rare and declining species. And as we lose those habitats, perhaps we lose those species as well. All right, so those are some of the main reasons that we burn. I want to put this in so I would remember to pause and see if Doug had any questions from the audience to ask me.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. We had a handful. I think there's some questions about where we can find resources, how burns would look on my property. Let's see, I'll pick one out here. Mark C asked, can you do a prescribed burn, say 2 acres of woodland within a wooded area where neighbors have adjacent woodland?
The short answer is yes, and I think the second part of this will answer it more fully. But I want to also be sure to tell people, I'll give you my email address at the end, and as you can probably tell, I'm happy to talk about fire. So I encourage you to contact me if you don't get your questions answered today, and especially something specific about your site. Email me, we can talk. If it's something I can answer over the phone, I'm happy to do that. If it requires a site visit and you're not too far away, I can probably do that for you too. All right, if there's no other clarifications about what we talked about, then I'll forge ahead and hopefully answer some of those other ones. Okay, so I've convinced you, should I burn my property? Well, let's see, not every site is a good candidate for burning. Part of answering that question is to do a site assessment. Is this a site that historically would have burned? Was fire a part of it? I'm often looking for a couple things when I go to visit a site. One, would this site benefit from fire? And 2, is there enough fuel present to actually burn it? In an area like this, with all of this fuel on the ground, all this thatch would certainly burn well. And when we talk about fuel here, I'm really talking about the fine dead vegetation that carries the fire, grasses, or in the woods, mainly oak hickory leaves. Oak leaves are filled with tannic acid. They don't decompose quickly. The leaves that fell today or that this fall will be out there when the snow melts. They'll look just like they did in the fall. They're intact, fully intact, probably curled up a little bit. Excellent for burning. Maple leaves next spring are going to be harder to find. They decompose a lot quicker. So it isn't just leaf litter. We need oak leaf litter or hickory or cherry, some of those. This shot I showed you before, not a good candidate for burning. There's lots of biomass in there, lots of woody things, lots of leaves, but not an area that's going to carry the fire. There's nothing on the ground that's going to carry that fire. And we don't have the grasses or the oak leaf litter there. So would it benefit from fire? Is there enough fuel? And if so, how is it best done? And what resources then do I need to do the burn safely and effectively? We know, and these are, these same questions I'm asking whether I'm going to visit, you're looking to do a prairie burn, talked about woodland burns, do a lot of wetland burns. These are both large Phragmites patches, but also smaller detention basins for all smaller patches. Look at the flames. If you've never seen a Phragmites burn, I'm often amazed. I'll see lots of detention basins with houses and pine trees not very far away. This is a small detention basin. If you know, this is a WISD on the west side of Ann Arbor. This is a small detention basin. They have there. You might be able to see the person on the right side there around my cursor. You know, a 6-foot tall person. These are flames that are 35 feet tall or so, and Phragmites burns extremely hot. So if you have anything that's heat sensitive, like a house or an evergreen tree within 20 feet of a stand of Phragmites, you may not realize what danger it could be if this thing catches on fire in an uncontrolled sort of way. We burn large fields out in the country, tiny little yards, rural areas, large landscapes up in the Northwoods, roadside prairies like this, where traffic control is a bigger issue, golf courses that have unplayable areas, a lot of corporate campuses, even green roofs. Look at the ladder on the left side, the yellow ladder. Every spring, this is up in Oakland County, they've got green roofs, a LEED certified building, a lot of native landscaping, and every year it's kind of fun. We put on our backpacks of water and climb up the ladder and burn their rooftops. I do burns in the spring where you get a nice complete burn like this. It looks like black velvet afterwards. Sometimes it can be that complete. Growing season burns, when vegetation is green, we may need to use different ways to ignite it, like a propane torch in this area case. And actually, we're using a propane torch here for a winter burn of a Phragmites area where we can't access the site when it's wet. So we have to go out there in the winter. I guess the point is that I've used fire every month of the year for different purposes, lots of different ecosystems. And that's part of what makes it really fun. It's not a real repetitive thing. Every site is different. Every site has different needs, different objectives, and different ways to solve those objectives, meet those objectives. Some even do some burning at night sometimes. All right, so my site is a good candidate for a burn. I'm in, let's do it. All right, well, hold on. First, we need to get a permit. We don't want the fire department showing up without knowing what's happening in the middle of one of our burns. So that's required beforehand. I typically handle that. If you're going to do it yourself, you should still make sure that they know that you're doing it. They may have, hopefully they won't block you. It won't be against it, but if they are going to have any issues, you want to know that in advance so that you can work out those issues. They're going to have questions for you. They want to know what you're burning and where and when, equipment, personnel, all these sort of things. They may want to know if you know what you're doing. They may want you to put together a burn plan or a burn prescription where you outline a lot of details there. Some of the main things that you might include there would be that you have a water source. Is it just a house, a garden hose from the house, or an outdoor spigot? Or do you have a truck with a mobile tank and a pump and hose that you can deliver water to it? I also have an Argo amphibious ATV with a 70-gallon tank on the back of it, so I can get out to areas I could not get to with my truck to deliver water. And we also have those backpacks of water that I showed you. Do you have some way to get that equipment around, either in the back of a truck, neatly organized like this, or just tossed in the back? These are the over here are the water cans, the Indian backpack sprayers that are pretty common. These are like 5-gallon super soakers with a hand pump that you can spray water probably 35 feet. You see some flappers here. This is for prairie burns. These are often pretty effective for just smothering fire that's might be crawling across the break. And some brooms that are often used, especially folks that don't want to carry around lots of water and are not dealing with big fires to put out. I see fire departments carrying shovels and brooms to try to smother fire and control, put out embers and things that way. And they're going to want to know about burn breaks. What are the burn breaks around here? Let's talk for a minute about burn breaks. These are things that I think of as well when I'm looking at a site to see if it's a good candidate for burning. Not every site runs up to green lawn like this, but green lawn makes an excellent burn break if you burn it late enough in the year. If you go out there in early March, your lawn might be brown and not be a very good burn break. Or in the middle of summer, of hot summer, your lawn might not be a very good burn break. But in April, or when it's nice and green and lush, green lawns make a great burn break. That's going to contain the fire, keep it from spreading there. Water can be a very good burn break. Railroad tracks are great burn breaks as long as you can burn up to them. A lot of times legally, property I'm looking at may not go up to the railroad tracks. The railroad may own the edge of that. And so we may need to get a permit from the railroad tracks, or maybe it's, well, just be aware that wherever possible, I like to find existing things that we can use as burn breaks. To create new burn breaks is hard work. So if we can find something existing to use, we try to do that as much as possible. Depending on the fuel that's present determines how big of a burn break you need. A small footpath like this can be an effective burn break. If there's nothing at all, this is up north where we expect some bigger flames. And in this case, we've got a disked line on the left side there. There's a 2-track, but the 2-track is pretty grassy. So there's a disked up line on the left that was our burn break. And this answers the question that was asked earlier. We can go into a big woods and we can carve out exactly whatever, we can define whatever the burn area is going to be with a backpack leaf blower. We blow the leaves aside, get down to bare ground, and that bare ground is our burn break. I should point out, this is not intended to stop a raging fire that's going to run up there and hit that line and go out. We know that won't happen. I'll talk in a little bit about how we actually conduct the burn, and then you'll see how we use that burn break. But this is, we burn off of here. We start a fire here and it burns away from that break. And when the flames are small there at the beginning of the fire, that is a sufficient break. If you don't have a good burn break and it's not a clean burn break like the trail here, then the fire will crawl across it. So it's important that we have a good, solid, complete burn break. And what we should have done here was to use a leaf blower to blow those leaves aside to get down to bare soil, so the fire didn't cross over that break.
Dave, would you like a live question here?
Sure, hit me.
Cheryl asked, can you burn an area that has an underground gas line?
Yeah, we've done that a lot. It's never been an issue. I think as long as there's not a gas leak anywhere, we're fine. Again, the heat doesn't penetrate at all, so that's never been an issue. The biggest issue there is just burning around those little fiberglass poles that stick up. If the burn breaks need some touching up, as they often do, then that's part of the site preparation. Blowing the leaves off, raking the leaves off of there so that you get down to bare soil. There have been times where I've gone out prior to the burn, prior to burn days, and created a cold black line like this that is where there's no fuel to burn. How do we do that? Well, you go off on a day that's not a really good burn day, where it's too wet, and maybe you use propane torches like this to force an area to burn up the vegetation, and then you don't have to worry about the fire crossing it. Obviously, much more labor intensive than using something that's existing. But in this case, we didn't want to burn up the wooden boardwalk, so we had to create a break around it. The fire department will also want to know about what kind of weather you're looking for. What those will go into your burn plan, not just temperature, but especially wind direction. Look at a site and think about, well, where do I want this smoke to go? Every fire is going to create some smoke. You can do things to try to minimize the amount of smoke, but where am I going to put the smoke? Which direction? Where are the smoke sensitive targets? Is there a road nearby, or a school, or a hospital? Oftentimes we're trying to pick directions, a wind direction that will keep the smoke away from those things. So we spent a lot of time monitoring the weather, both on site, but also doing trying to get the best forecast we can. And if you watch the weather at all, it's hard to get a good forecast. Sometimes people will tell me, oh, it looks like next Tuesday ought to be a good burn day. Well, I wouldn't trust the forecast more than about a day or two in advance. If they tell me that it's going to be 20% humidity in a week, I don't believe that at all. That's why it makes it hard to predict, hard to plan these burns, and hard to plan it more than a couple days in advance. The hardest issue I have with fire departments is that they say, well, give us a week notice before you do it. And I say, well, I probably can't do that. We end up saying, maybe next Monday, maybe next Tuesday, maybe next Wednesday. And eventually they say, okay, well, just call me when you're going to actually do it. Probably the best source I like to look to is simply the Weather Service, weather.gov. Go to their hourly weather graph. A quick interpretation of this is that the red line on top is temperature, The green line on top is the dew point. The closer those are, the more humid it is. When they're really close, the humidity is up to 100%. When they're farther apart, the relative humidity is lower. And if we drop down here, if you can see my cursor, there's a green line down here. And as I mentioned, we're at 90% relative humidity, and that's when the temperature and the dew point are pretty close. And back here at 4 o'clock, the first day on this Wednesday, there's a pretty big gap between temperature and dew point, and our RH is down to 32%. We like to burn typically below 50% humidity to get things to go. But that again depends on the site. If I'm burning a Phragmites site or a prairie site, I can get by with higher humidities. If I have a woodland site, maybe I want something lower. Depends how complete, how thorough I want my burn to be. But this is a good way to monitor the weather. And when do we get good weather days like that? This was a chart we kept track of for a bunch of years in Ann Arbor, just to look at the calendar and mark every day that we burned. And you'll see that most of the time we're getting around Southeast Michigan here, the days that we get the kind of weather conditions we're looking for fall somewhere between the middle of March and maybe the 1st of May. Here I am looking out the window. We finally got some snow. I was wondering there if I'd be burning in February. We sometimes have burned in late February, but my spring season typically goes from as soon as the snow is gone until things green up too much. So it might be, end of February through May. And some sites actually we want to green up more to try to control certain invasives. As I mentioned, I've burned every month of the year. This is a spring graph. Here's a picture, the same scale from fall. We do some fall burning. That's the second biggest season, but it's much reduced from the spring season. And that typically happens if we're going to burn in the fall in late October or maybe early November. We have to wait for the oak leaves to come down, and they typically are on the trees much longer than maple leaves. So they'll come down around the 1st of November or something. All right, but what you maybe have been waiting for, time for the actual burn. Let's see how this actually happens. We show up on site, we unpack our gear. Once we found a good weather day, I always encourage property owners, if this is your first burn, you should do some photo monitoring. We did this with the city, and hopefully the photos I showed you before and after were inspiring or conclusive or demonstrable or something. But there's no substitute in my mind for having some good before and after photos. So you won't ever get a chance after the burn to see what it looked like before. So get out there beforehand and take some photos so you can see the change. Probably need to do some additional site prep that day. Besides identifying what those breaks were going to be, we look for other things that we need to remove fuel from. I don't really like this picture because it's just a little stump. That's no big deal. The bigger thing we're concerned about are chimney trees. And these are trees that are hollow trees. They probably still are alive and look healthy, but if you look close, there's a little hole in the bottom, and that hole, if fire gets in there, it can burn inside. Be very hard to put out. We may have to cut the tree open to put it out, or in the worst case scenario, it's hollow all the way up. That fire gets in and spreads up the tree, and the smoke is pouring out a hole up at the top, and we probably have to cut down that tree. So we're looking for things like chimney trees, and we might clear the leaves away from there, or utility pole or something. In this case, it's the same technique for controlling either of those. We simply want to burn around that and make sure that item of concern doesn't catch fire with using water like this or raking away the fuel. Sometimes we need to do that with evergreens as well. And one of my biggest headaches as a contractor is trying to do hot burns in prairies and woodlands, but protect individual evergreen trees. Evergreens are very heat sensitive. If you don't control the heat, you end up singeing the lower branches like that. I always say, if you can't take the heat, get out of the prairie. They shouldn't grow there anyhow. But that's a challenge. And you know why? If there's any landscape architects in the audience, please don't put prairie vegetation on a slope with evergreens up on top. It just is making a much harder project for whoever's going to try to burn that prairie in the future. We also need to put up signs. The fire departments always insist on that we have some kind of signs to let motorists know. A lot of times fire departments, even if they are supportive of burns, just don't want to get plagued with a bunch of calls about it. So put up some signs so people know what's happening. All right, we're getting our equipment ready for the burn, briefing the crew. A well-dressed burn crew member has probably got a backpack of water on and some other tool to help control the fire. In this case, a backpack of water. And so I've got something to light the fire with, like a drip torch here, and then a backpack of water. The drip torch works by this combination of diesel and gas in it. As you tip it over, fuel drips out and goes past the flaming wick, and then it drops fire onto the ground. That's the main thing that we use to light fires with. We can also use, in some cases, a propane torch if we think that dripping liquid fuel on the ground is not going to, on the snow, is not going to work real well. Here is how our burns work 99.9% of the time. Imagine in these pictures that the wind is coming from the left to the right. So we go downwind, start at the downwind side. Remember that burn break we talked about? Well, we're going to use that break and we're going to light a little fire there. The wind's going to want to push it to the right in this picture, but the right is on the right side. It's our burn break of bare soil. So the fire can't go across there. It instead burns back into the wind. It's a back burn or a backing fire. Of course, if the fire were to jump across there, we'd have our water to put it out. But we burn away from that downwind burn break. Here's that fire backing through the leaf litter. In prairies, it's still a backing fire. Look how the smoke's going off to the right, but much bigger flames. So you need wider breaks if you're going to have bigger flames. Once we have a good wide back burn break on the downwind side, we can carry our flanking fire around the sides. That's going to be bigger flames because it's not having to back into the wind as much. This is also a time when we might send people, if we need to go inside of the burn unit to do some interior ignition, we'd send someone in there to do some burning. And finally, we'd light a fire at the upwind side, and letting this fire get pushed by the wind. That's going to be much bigger flames, much faster moving. You can tell that this is a head fire because the smoke is blowing into the burn unit. And here we have again the wind pushing the fire into the burn unit. I have to go back to this picture. I made a mistake here. This is not a head fire. This is a backing fire. We're at the upwind side and the smoke is pushing it from right to or left to right. But I see now that I look at it, this is a fire that's backed up to the upwind side. So in this case, it looks like we never actually lit a head fire. We let that fire back through the burn unit up to the upwind side. Just notice that. Here's a head fire going up the slope. Head fires are determined both by wind direction, but also by slope. Fire wants to go up slopes. And here's a good picture of a little prairie fire. The closest flames are kind of a flanking fire or backing fire, but then you get around on the left side and let the wind push it, and you see a much different kind of flame. Another head fire in a prairie. All right, so this is a description of it. We got a couple of videos. Doug, can you, a couple of short videos that'll show us what this looks like. And I think this is better than me talking through it. So this, and this picture, in this video, the wind is coming from the lower right side. So you can see that we've started the fire on the upper left. Not much happens here at first. This is only a 30-second long video though, so it's gonna go quick. We're carrying fire down both sides. And as we get down further to the lower right, we're gonna get some bigger flames. These are flanking fires we're seeing now. Things are a little different with that pond in there. It kind of stops that fire that's closest to us. But look on the far side, that flanking fire rushes through and pretty quickly pushes through. Let's run that one through one more time because it's now you can watch it a little more closely. 90% of the time is spent on the back burn, on the flanking fire, letting more and more black line get established on that downwind side. Sometimes people are surprised that we start down there. They say, I thought you would have started it up here, let it go with the wind. It would certainly burn faster then. But when we light that head fire, I need to know that there's a solid black on the downwind side and that this head fire is going to hit that and go out. Without that downwind burn break, this big fire you see right here would just take off and keep going through the woods. So we never light the head fire till we are sure we have good breaks everywhere else. Thank you, Doug. Let's run the next one. This one's a little a different perspective. This one's from a drone. It's not quite as thorough all the way through. It was done as more of a entertaining piece, I guess, but I think the footage is pretty interesting to show how we do the burn. Again, this is a prairie. We start off trying to back burn around some evergreen trees. This is my crew and I with my Argo ATV. And here's a prairie that we're doing in Washtenaw County in Scioto Township. There's music to this too, but I told him to turn that down because it doesn't really add much to our description. Here we are with our little back burn. I'm over there with my Argo trying to protect those evergreen trees with some water. The crew all has radios on that we're communicating with, so I kind of coordinate the whole thing. This is, I think, interesting view. We're back burning. The wind's coming in this case from the upper left, and we're back burning away from these trees. And see how that black burn break gets wider and wider. And the wider it gets, then the more aggressively we can burn. People are often surprised how controlled these burns are. We can have exact lines, and they need to be that way. If I can't control exactly where it burns, then it's not a very controlled fire. We're burning up there. In this case, that lawn is their burn break. We're burning up near their houses. This is all going quite slowly again here. We're slowly back burning in and getting that area, the black burn break, wider and wider. And eventually now we're going to see some faster moving fire. Once we start to have more flanking fires, here's our flanking fire moving a little quicker. And as we get up to the upper left and those two igniters connect, here this head fire pushes over pretty quick. And once the whole perimeter is lit, it all burns together very quickly and it's all over. So like I said, the first 90% of it is spent doing this preparation, burning around some things, and then it all finishes up pretty quick. All right, we can stop that video there. And I think I need to take back my screen. Let's see. All right, so to finish up here, we've done our burn. We need to do any mop up. That's putting out any smolders. If we're out in a rural area and the fire department and the property owner say, let that burn overnight, that's fine. We're happy to do that. But if the fire department has any concerns or the homeowner does, we need to put out every smolder, every log and things that smolder. The goal, again, is just to burn through the leaf litter, and that's the heat that we need to generate to kill the shrubs and things. Our goal is not to burn up all the logs and things. And sometimes people want me to come out and burn up all the logs in the woods. That's not going to work. That's the burn. Smoke is always a big concern, and I just want to say we don't take that lightly. Hopefully it's not an issue, but people have concerns about the smoke. I'll point out that this is just tons per acre of fuel biomass from different ecosystems. We're burning longleaf little tallgrass prairies like these in the far right with only 1, 2, or 3 tons per acre of fuel. There's not a lot of stuff to burn there. We might also burn oak, hickory, hardwood forests, but again, we're not burning the big logs there. We're just burning the leaf litter. So one of the ways that we reduce smoke is that we're burning ecosystems that don't have a lot of tons per acre that you see on the TV shows from the news coverage from fires out west of some of the fires in the western US. Most of our burning is done in the dormant season, where there's a lot less smoke. That's one of the concerns about trying to burn in the growing season, especially in an urban area. And when it's dormant like that, we don't get a lot of smoke. We avoid lighting up those big logs and trees. We pick days when we can get the maximum efficiency of burning. We do complete mop up, so we don't leave any of these logs smoldering afterwards. We burn when atmospheric conditions let the smoke get up there and out of there. We use different smoke modeling tools to predict where exactly the smoke is going to go, so we can send it away from any smoke sensitive areas. We blow smoke away from sensitive areas like the road that's just off the picture to the left here. Notify the public with signs.
Hey, Dave, I have another question,
All right.
smoke related.
Yeah.
Maybe more topics here too, but poison ivy issues. So
Yeah.
perhaps with burning, but also during mop up, and maybe even does poison ivy bounce back strongly or not? So.
Well, poison ivy is a native plant, and it's one that is not really well controlled with fire. So I wouldn't use fire to and promise you that we could control your poison ivy. I'll also say that there's probably few people who are more sensitive to poison ivy than I am. I'm extremely sensitive to it. I've had it every year of my life. And so that is one of my concerns. But for the most part, it hasn't been as big of a concern as I would have thought. The biggest issue, I think, is if you're right up close to what's burning there, like if you're around a campfire and you're breathing in that smoke. We try really hard as a burn crew to stay out of the smoke. We can't always do it, but we're trying to stay upwind of it and stay out of the smoke. And but even so, I always come back feeling pretty sooty. I've never had it inside of me. I've never ingested it like I've heard some horror stories from. So I think that it's a bigger issue if you're burning it on a pile or something like that. With that, let me give you my final quote, and then we can answer some more questions. I was going to leave you with one more historic quote here. And this is from J.W. Wing in Scioto Township, who says, "The scene was beautiful beyond description. The timber consisted of large oak trees standing several rods apart. A rod is about 16.5 feet, so several rods is 30 or 40 feet. And the intermediate space between them was covered with bright green grass and beautiful flowers. The whole country had been burnt over every fall or spring, I presume, for centuries, and everything had been destroyed except these giants of the forest. It did appear as if one half of the vegetation was flowers. Most of them were about 18 inches high, and when moved by the wind, the effect was wonderful. I have never seen in any of our large cities a park that was its equal." So this is not some faraway place they're describing. This is here in Washtenaw County, only less than 200 years ago. Big trees. I've never seen a park in any of our large cities as was its equal. This is what our heritage is here, and that's what we're using fire to try to restore and bring back. Oh, I thought it was done. 2 conferences you should know about. One is the annual Stewardship Network Conference coming up next week, February 2nd and 3rd. You can get details at the stewardshipnetwork.org, and also the Michigan Prescribed Fire Council's annual Burning Issues Symposium coming up in Grayling in February 7th and 8th at thefirecouncil.org. I'll leave this slide up for a minute so you can copy those down if you want to, and I'll invite Doug to ask me some other questions.
Thanks, Dave. Great presentation. We do have some questions in. One that has come up in some different forms is species specific about largely invasives. Is it effective with Asian bittersweet, autumn olive, top killing buckthorn and honeysuckle? A lot of people are interested about that and how to manage those invasives.
So I'd say it's most effective against some of those, or buckthorn and honeysuckle and multiflora rose are all ones that I've controlled pretty effectively with fire. Harder with autumn olive because as they grow and get big and fat and sprawl out, it's hard to get fire up to the stem. So you just can't, you can get fire on the outside branches, but you can't get the heat in on the stem as you need it because of that growth form. I think you can control it well when it's smaller. It may resprout, but you're gonna, again, I don't want to paint these as evil plants, bad plants. Sometimes restorationists have been accused of being botanical Nazis, and we should accept those things. It's not that they're bad plants, it's just that dense shading is the issue. So if you can catch an autumn olive or those other shrubs when they're smaller, you can top kill them and let more sunlight in. Even if you can't kill the whole plant, even if it does resprout. The Oriental bittersweet, unfortunately, is one that does not seem to be very well controlled with fire, other than knocking it back a little bit, but it's going to come back pretty aggressively. That's probably one you need to use some herbicide with as well. What else do you have, Doug?
Yeah, let's see. We also had some questions, some other specific species specific about milkweed. Is milkweed stimulated by burns?
I'm guessing it does. I don't have any real specific information, but any of our native prairie plants are going to do well with fire. Some of the only, things that are negatively affected by some of the native shrubs, if we've got, any woody plant, even the native shrubs are going to be hit back by fire. If they're ones that historically grew in fire areas, they're probably going to do fine. Things like staghorn sumac. I've burned prairies really, really hot that had a lot of staghorn sumac, and I thought, well, that's going to take care of that, but it comes back just fine. What you do is to change it from being a big woody plant to new growth every year that only gets to be 4 or 5 feet tall. So I think the milkweed does fine with I've seen it respond really well to fire.
Great, thanks. And if anyone else has some questions, drop them in the chat or question and answer. We're a little ahead of time, so we've got time for questions yet. I've got another one here in the queue. Someone was interested in terms of burning in parks. They asked, I've heard about some parks that they're unable to clear more invasives and underbrush, either manually or with fire, as park attendees like the fullness of the forest around the trail. They get upset when there's a clear out, even if it's invasives. How do you balance and overcome this type of issue within the parks?
Yeah, it's a good question. We had the benefit, I think, I could say lots about that. I think the best solution is to go slow and try to do some demonstrations. We, I understand people like the screening there and things. So what we would do is to pick an area, a small area that was not on the edge, not controversial, and just do a demonstration. That a demonstration burn is the best way to win over people. They see the response. They see that it wasn't the big wildfire they thought it was going to be. They see the response of the natives there, and that tends to bring people on. Sometimes park neighbors just want to have a screening there, and then it doesn't matter whether it's dense buckthorn or some other dense native shrub. Neither one of those are got oak savanna, real natural open environments. So I guess you just have to come up with some way to address their screening. Either maybe you can put up a fence there or something. But that's a common issue that we face with people in parks who like to have some screening.
Great, thank you. We have another one, maybe in the similar realm of the question is, how can I better advocate for my local municipality to clean up fallen trees and promote historical landscapes and beneficial fires? And this as a kind of also mention about a mosquito issue, which was solved with pesticide sprays.
Yeah.
How to encourage, and then I know that's a big topic there.
Well, I think, yeah, as I understand it, you're going to have this on YouTube. You could go back and get the references for some of those, like the Michigan Natural Features Inventory study about oaks and savannas and things. I think you can make a strong case that these prairie environments, and oak savannas, these more open landscapes are declining pretty quickly, and there's lots of species that depend on that. So even without knowing a lot of details, you can, about maybe you're not an expert botanist and you don't know what's growing there, you can just make the case pretty accurately that those kinds of open savanna, open woodland landscapes are historically what we're here and are disappearing pretty quickly, and we're losing species with that. And so we should maintain that landscape. I didn't really talk a lot about this, but it'd be really useful, I think, to go back and look at pre-European settlement records for your county. Every county courthouse has them. You can see the original land survey notes when they did this. The 1824 is when they did, or 1819 is when they did Ann Arbor, I think. And they went through and wrote down the notes of what the landscape was, and you can see what the landscape was like then, and read the descriptions of the prairies and things. So you can look back potentially and see what your specific site was like.
Absolutely, thank you. And I there's some other questions there too in that realm of the resources to look back at those records. There's some websites on. I think I also want to plug the Conservation Stewards Program by the MSU Extension that's coming back this fall. I think Bindu is on, but that's a great place to learn about our historic natural communities. And we can drop that link here too. And just to say too, that all the links and such that were mentioned in the chats, we'll be putting those on the recording once it's posted to YouTube. So, but we keep having some good questions come in here. Let's see, in particular, someone asked, how much do burns cost?
Yeah, that's a common question from people.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be dodgy about it. It depends on, people want a per acre cost. It depends how long it's going to take to do the job. And that depends how far away you are, how big it is, how good the brakes are. You know, 1 acre site with no brakes and lots of things to burn around is going to take a lot longer and be more expensive than a 10-acre site that's got great, wide, clean brakes. We just go in and do it and be gone. I'm happy to give people ballpark figures if they contact me to say, well, I got 10 acres of woods in this location. I could say, well, in the past, it's been a cost something like this. But each site is different, and I need to either visit the site or get a lot more details about it before I could give you a better estimate for it. Sorry to be cagey about that. I will encourage you to call me or text me or email me with other questions if we don't get them all asked today, or something else about your site.
Great. I think there's a few questions. We'll wrap up here with this. Just curious which tree species are more fire resistant. People are asking about basswood, beech, maples. Do they survive as well as oaks?
Yeah, no, maples tend to be more fire sensitive. Historically, they would not have lived in fire adapted ecosystems. They would have been down in the lower, wetter spots. There's a phenomenon of maple invasion, where native maple trees moving up into the oak uplands. So the thicker, corkier bark trees are going to survive better. Maples, which tend to be thinner barked, especially when they're smaller, are more sensitive. I think basswood are probably in the middle someplace.
Thank you. Yeah, and a real quick, we'll squeeze this one in too.
All right.
Someone's asking about if they're interested in the burn crew and if you hire graduate students.
Oh yeah, great. Thank you. Looking for a burn crew. I'm about to put out an ad that says, hey, looking for burn crew. So contact me if you are interested. Happy to hire people for the spring. It's a pretty erratic schedule. I can never tell people in advance. Some people are only available certain days a week, but yeah, happy to have people, hire people to be on my burn crew. Contact me, we'll talk.
Could you speak to, I know this is no longer your role, but to the NAP burn trainings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what day it is, but NAP does a burn training every spring. You need to go through there one day, or it's like a 4 or 5 hour burn training in order to be on their burn crew. That's a great way to get some experience with fire. They'll treat you right and walk you through step by step how to do that. You could contact the city's NAP, Natural Area Preservation Office in Ann Arbor. I can always remember the old phone number, which is 734, which still works, 734-996-3266 is the number that it used to be, and I think that number still works. It's in the Parks Department in Ann Arbor, 734-996-3266. Tell them Dave sent you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dave. That was a fantastic presentation, and I'm sure you're getting a lot of virtual clap out here. I know, again, it's kind of lonely. You can't
You need a little applause button. You have to have play some canned applause.
Right. Okay, good comment. We'll do that next time.
All right.
But it was fantastic and really compelling to see those before and after photos. So thank you for sharing those. And the videos were awesome as well. Really gave people an idea of what a prescribed burn looks like.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing those. So I guess before we sign off, I just wanted to highlight a few of the upcoming events and programs that we have at WCCD and encourage you all to check out our website. Again, it's washtenaw.cd.org to learn more about what we do, to order plants, to sign up for the other webinar and presentation in the series, and to check out our tool lending, library, and rental, because maybe you've got some big plans now on your property and you may need a few more pieces of equipment. So with that, again, a big thank you to Dave. This was an awesome presentation, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.